Back off, right now. She said it once. The gun was already against her skull. Dale Pruitt didn't move. His 2 men didn't move. Nobody in that corridor moved except Rex. 74 pounds of muscle and absolute certainty dropping his weight in the dark, silent, coiled head locked onto the man holding the weapon. Not barking, not lunging, deciding. Pruitt laughed. That was his mistake. Because Maya Carter wasn't begging. She wasn't stalling. She had been recording for 47 minutes. She had already won. Rex already knew it. Pruitt had exactly 2 seconds to figure out what he'd walked into. He didn't use either one. If this story hits you somewhere deep, subscribe right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far Maya's story travels. The gun made contact at 2:17 in the morning. Not a warning shot. Not a threat delivered from across the room. Dale Pruitt pressed the barrel directly against the base of Maya Carter's skull, that specific spot at the top of the neck where the bone meets the stem, and he laughed. The laugh of a man who has never once in his life been made to pay for a laugh like that. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She didn't move her hands toward her sides, or lean away, or make any of the sounds that the human body tries to make when a loaded weapon touches it. She stood completely still, palms open at her sides, fingers spread, and she started counting. Not seconds. She was counting his breathing. 3 slow beats. She clocked the tremor in his wrist, slight irregular, the specific pattern of someone on their 3rd drink who thinks they're on their 2nd. She read the pressure of the barrel firm, but not locked. He wasn't going to pull. Not yet. Maybe not at all. But scared men with loaded weapons were the most dangerous kind. She'd learned that before she learned most things worth knowing. Behind her, Corporal Hank Weston and Corporal Joey Brandt stood blocking the corridor exits, arms crossed, wearing the expressions of men who had been invited to watch something and were already enjoying it. The hallway smelled like spilled alcohol and the particular stale heat of unchecked authority. And in the dark at the far end of the corridor, silent low weight shifted back to his haunches. Head dropped exactly 45 degrees toward the man holding the gun. Rex watched, not moving, not making a sound, just watching, the way a decision watches. "You're going to tell me to back off again, Carter." Pruitt's voice dropped into that register men use when they want to sound dangerous instead of just drunk. "Because I think your little dog is confused about who's in charge around here." Maya said nothing. She was still reading him. Wrist tremor, breathing pattern. The micro-tension in his forearm that told her his grip was posturing, not committed. "Come on," Weston said from behind her. "Say it. Tell him to back off, like you did in the briefing room, like you did at the kennel." A pause. "Like you're going to do in your transfer paperwork in about 6 days. The laughter from both of them landed like something thrown. Maya let it land, absorbed it, filed it. "Pruitt." Her voice came out flat, controlled, not a single note of the fear that was absolutely alive in her chest running hot and fast and completely invisible. "You're going to want to lower that weapon. Or what?" Pruitt stepped closer, which told her more than anything he'd said. Men who are certain don't step closer. They stay where they are. "Your incident report's going to come after me. Your little documentation file." Another laugh. "You know what happens to incident reports in this unit?" Carter. "Same thing that happens to women who file them. They disappear," Brandt added helpfully. "They disappear," Pruitt confirmed. Maya breathed. 4 counts in, 4 out. "Last time," she said. "Lower the weapon." Rex exhaled. It was the only sound in the corridor, and somehow it was louder than everything else. Low and deliberate. Not a bark. Not a growl. Something more ancient than either. The sound a predator makes when patience has finished being a virtue. Weston's arms uncrossed. She heard it. She filed that too. But this is not where the story starts. 6 weeks earlier, Maya Carter arrived at the Naval Special Warfare Training Annex outside San Diego with a rucksack, transfer papers, and Rex walking at her left heel the way he always did, quiet, precise, exactly where he was supposed to be. She was the first female K-9 handler assigned to Bravo 7. She knew what that meant before she got out of the vehicle. Commander Ellis Hatch shook her hand with the energy of a man signing off on a form he hadn't read all the way through. "Handler Carter, I've reviewed your file." He held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than courtesy required, then dropped it. "Impressive." One word. Delivered the way a weather forecast is delivered. Factual, impersonal, complete. "Thank you, sir." Rex's service record is notable as well. A pause. "We'll see how you both integrate." She understood precisely what that meant. It was not a welcome. It was an audition she hadn't been told she was performing. The first week they ignored her. Locker assignments placed her in a separate corridor. Briefing handouts reached her last pages, sometimes missing, sometimes in the wrong order. At meals, the conversation didn't stop. It pivoted just enough that sustained angle of exclusion that requires no coordination, because everyone already knows the geometry of it. Maya had lived through worse. She documented every incident, said nothing, kept performing. The second week, it became something else. It started with Rex. Someone left the gate to his kennel unlatched. Twice. The first time, Rex sat exactly where he'd been placed and waited because he was trained to do that, because his training was the thing nobody in this unit was capable of undoing, no matter what else they did. The second time, Maya arrived at 0530 to find Corporal Joey Brandt outside the kennel with a stick poking it through the chain link, making sounds he probably thought were commands. Rex was watching him with the expression of a professor forced to sit through a presentation by someone who has clearly never read the material. Maya removed the stick from Brandt's hand without a word and went inside. "He's wasted on you," Brandt said behind her. "Animal like that needs a real handler." She didn't turn around. "Then study harder and apply for the program." She heard him laugh. She heard him walk away. She filed the incident report that evening. It vanished somewhere between her desk and Commander Hatch's office. She filed a second one. Same result. By week 3, she had mapped the architecture of what was happening. This was not random hostility. This was a system. Pruitt at the top 12 years of deployments and unit credibility that had calcified into something institutional. Weston and Brandt below him running support, not because they hated her specifically, but because the structure of their loyalty ran in one direction and always had. And Hatch above all of them, doing what leaders do when they want plausible deniability: nothing. Nothing loudly. Nothing consistently. Nothing with great paperwork efficiency. She filed her third report. It disappeared. She called her JAG contact for the first time that night. Lieutenant Commander Sharon Vega picked up on the second ring and said, "Tell me everything." Maya told her. Sharon listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, Sharon said, "Keep documenting. Don't stop for any reason. What you're building is the record. It won't stop what's happening." "No," Sharon said, "but it will matter later." Maya sat with that. She thought about what later meant in a unit where 4 women before her had apparently been transferred, sealed, papered over, and quietly dissolved. She thought about what later had cost all of them. She kept documenting. The night it escalated for the first time, the first real escalation, the one that made the walls of the system visible in a way that no longer looked like whether Maya was in the common room running a post-exercise debrief. Standard procedure. She was documenting Rex's alert patterns during the afternoon training scenario, identifying 2 behavioral markers that could be refined, walking through her notes for the official record. Pruitt walked in halfway through. He poured himself coffee without acknowledging that she was mid-sentence. He sat down across from her, looked at his mug, and said, "You know what your problem is, Carter." She paused her debrief. "Tell me." "You think this is about being good at the job." She waited. "It's about fit." He looked up at her then. Really looked, with the specific cruelty of a man who has practiced his cruelties for so long, they've become reflexes. "And you don't fit." Rex lifted his head from across the room. His eyes tracked to Pruitt and stayed there. My performance evaluations would suggest otherwise, Maya said. Evenly. Completely. Evaluations. He almost smiled. Right. Evaluations are written by people. People who have to work with you after. People who talk to each other. He stood, took his coffee. You want to think about that. He left. Maya sat in the specific cold weight of a threat that has never used threatening language. The kind HR can't touch. The kind that dissolves the moment you try to write it down because in writing it becomes nothing, and in the room it was everything. She looked at Rex. He was still watching the door. I know, she said quietly. Me too. 2 days later, she found her service file on the common room table. Open. Personal assessment pages face up. Someone had taken a red marker and written 3 words across her psychological evaluation. Doesn't belong here. Her hands did not shake when she picked it up. She photographed it with her phone, 3 shots from 2 angles timestamp visible, and walked directly to Commander Hatch's office and placed it on his desk without speaking. Hatch looked at it for a long moment. I'll look into it, he said. Sir? Her voice was completely even. You've said that before. Handler Carter. 3 incident reports, 2 kennel violations, 1 documented threat to my operational credibility. Now this. She kept her eyes on him. Not angry, not pleading. Precise. I'm asking you directly, Commander. Is this unit capable of professional conduct, or am I documenting a pattern for an outside review? The room went very quiet. Hatch's jaw tightened. That kind of language doesn't help your integration. Integration. She repeated the word and let it sit there between them for 1 full second. Is that what this is? She picked up the file and walked out. Here is what nobody in Bravo 7 understood about Maya Carter. She hadn't come there to be accepted. She hadn't come to prove herself to Pruitt, or Weston, or Brandt, or a commander who had made a career out of looking away from the right things at the right moments. She had come because 18 months earlier, she had been pulled from a black operations mission in a country that still could not be named in official documents, pulled out of an operation that had gone catastrophically wrong, that had taken the lives of 2 operators and a 4-year-old K-9 named Coda, who had been her first partner. And she had been quietly, efficiently, institutionally blamed for a call she had not made. The official report said handler error. The unofficial version, the one that every person in her world understood, was more complicated, more political, and more dangerous to more powerful people than anyone was willing to commit to paper, had never been written anywhere that mattered. She had been reassigned instead of court-martialed because a court-martial would have required discovery, and discovery would have been catastrophic for the people above her. Maya had understood this with a clarity that left no room for comfort. She had spent 4 months after the incident building a file. Not out of bitterness, not out of anger, though both were present, and she would have been less than human if they hadn't been. She built it out of the same methodical discipline she applied to every task she'd ever been given. Read the environment, identify the threat, prepare the appropriate response. Rex had been the only K-9 to survive that operation. He'd been assigned to her afterward, and she had never been told whether that was coincidence or institutional guilt, or some quartermaster's administrative decision. But the first morning he sat at her left heel, she had understood something without needing to name it. They were the same. Both of them had been in the building when it fell. Both of them had walked out. And both of them were still performing at the highest level, because that was the only language that meant anything in this world. The language of showing up and doing the work and refusing to become the thing they'd been told you were. She had not come back to fight. She had come back to prove the record wrong. And Pruitt, drunk, backed by his 2-man audience, pressing a barrel to her skull like a man who had never once faced a consequence he couldn't outrank, was standing directly in the way of that. Back in the corridor. 2:17 a.m. You're going to report me, Pruitt said. His laugh had an edge of uncertainty in it now, She heard it, that hairline crack in a performance that had been going longer than the performer planned. Who do you think they're going to believe, 12-year operator with 3 combat deployments? He paused. Or the woman with handler error on her record? Or the woman, Maya said, with 6 weeks of documentation. Something shifted in his breathing. She caught it. The micro-hesitation, the fraction of a second pause that meant a calculation was happening behind the performance. Weston moved from his position on the left. She's bluffing. Am I? It wasn't a question. She said it the way someone states coordinates. Flat and absolute. 6 weeks of incident reports, photographs, JAG consultation, and a very thorough understanding of the UCMJ articles that cover exactly what is happening in this corridor right now. She paused one beat. All of it documented. All of it dated. All of it already with people who are not in this building. Brandt made a sound, not quite a laugh, something more uncertain. The sound of a man reconsidering his position in something he signed up to watch, not participate in. Put it away, Maya said. Her voice dropped, not softer, quieter, which is different. The difference between a speaker turning down their volume and a blade being drawn slowly. Walk away. I will give you exactly 24 hours to think about whether the path you are on tonight is the one you want to finish on. Pruitt's hand trembled. Just once. Just barely. Rex repositioned, weight shifting to his back haunches, slow and deliberate. And the sound that came from him, low, ancient, somewhere below language, moved through the corridor the way a pressure change moves felt before it is heard. Every person in that hallway felt it. Weston stepped back. 1 step, then a second. Dale? Brandt's voice had changed. The smirk was completely gone. Man, shut up. But Pruitt snapped it, and snapping at your own support means you've already lost the room. Maya felt the moment shift, the exact point when a bluff stops being a bluff and becomes a reckoning. Last time, she said, quiet as a door closing. Lower the weapon. The gun stayed where it was for 3 more seconds. Then Dale Pruitt made his choice. And what happened next? Every consequence, every reckoning, every buried truth about Bravo 7 and the people above it who had kept those truths buried began moving like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time and had just found the crack it needed. What Pruitt didn't know, what none of the 3 of them could have known. Maya had not come to this corridor unprepared. She had known this moment was coming. Not this exact moment, not this specific hallway, not 217, not the smell of bourbon and the particular shape of Dale Pruitt's ego in crisis. But she had known the way you know a storm from the pressure in the air 3 hours before it arrives. She had known it the day the first report disappeared. She had known it the day she found her file on that table with 3 words in red marker. She had prepared, not the way frightened people prepare, stockpiling grievances, rehearsing arguments, waiting for someone else to step in. She had prepared the way operators prepare, methodically, without emotion, accounting for variables and building contingencies for each one. Her phone on her person right now had been recording since she entered this corridor. 47 minutes of audio, and the moment Pruitt pressed that barrel to her skull, the moment the recording captured the unmistakable sound of metal making contact with a human skull, Maya Carter had already won. She just had to survive the next 60 seconds. Rex pressed his flank against the back of her knee. Not a lunge, not an attack, a signal, simple and absolute. I'm here. I'm ready. Your call. Maya Carter took one breath, held it, and then Pruitt said something she hadn't expected. You think that recording means anything? And she understood 2 things simultaneously. He had seen the phone, and he had just confirmed on tape in his own voice that he knew he was being recorded. She almost smiled. Almost. It means exactly what it sounds like, she said. A weapon. My skull. Your voice. 47 minutes of everything that led to this moment. She paused. 1 beat. Clean and precise. You want to keep going, or do you want to make the smartest decision you've made all night? Weston moved first, and not toward her, 2 steps back toward the exit. Arms dropping from their crossed position, the body language of a man quietly removing himself from a situation he no longer wanted his name on. She cataloged that. Men who step back first always cooperate first when it goes to review. Brant said, "Dale." Pruitt's performance was leaking. She could hear it, the compression leaving his voice, the authority deflating like something punctured. What remained underneath was smaller and tighter and honestly scared. The barrel lifted. Not smoothly, not with any dignity. It came up in a jerky sideways motion, and Pruitt stepped back and pointed it at the floor and then shoved it into his holster like the weapon had personally betrayed him. Maya turned around. She did it slowly, deliberately, because the way you turn around after something like that tells everyone in the room, including yourself, exactly who just won. She looked at Pruitt. Took in the red in his face, the sweat at his temple, the jaw working around words he couldn't form. Then she looked at Weston, who had found something intensely interesting to study on the wall beside him. Then Brant, who at least had the basic human decency to look ashamed. "Get some sleep," she said. All 3 of them. Quiet as a verdict. Then she walked back to her quarters with Rex at her heel, and she did not look back once. The moment her door closed, her hands started shaking. She sat on the edge of her bunk and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed the way she'd been trained to breathe when the body is running hot and the mind needs to catch up. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out, 4. Rex put his head in her lap without being asked. He always knew. From the very first morning she clipped his lead after Coda died, he had always known exactly when to come close. "I've got it," she whispered. To him, to herself. "I've got all of it." Because she did. The recording had been set to auto-transfer to a secure cloud account the moment she entered that corridor. 47 minutes and change of audio evidence that would take a JAG attorney approximately 20 minutes to categorize, and approximately 20 more to turn into the beginning of the end of Dale Pruitt's career. She should have felt relief. She should have felt something clean and definitive. Instead, she felt exhausted in the specific way that comes not from physical effort, but from spending years being exactly right about exactly the wrong things. She pulled out her phone, looked at the upload confirmation, thought about Coda, the way he used to press his nose against the back of her hand during briefings when she was stressed. The way he had moved through that building in a country she still couldn't name in official documents, sure, fearless, trusting her completely. Right up until the ceiling came down on the eastern corridor and took him and Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt with it, while the man who had given that order was already writing his after-action report with her name at the top of it. Rex lifted his head and looked at her. "Yeah," she said softly. "I know." She opened her phone and sent the audio file to Lieutenant Commander Sharon Vega with 4 words. It happened. "Call me." Then she lay back on her bunk with Rex alongside her and waited for dawn. She didn't sleep. And neither did Dale Pruitt, though for very different reasons. What she didn't know lying there in the dark was that the situation she had just survived was about to become significantly more complicated. Because Pruitt, drunk and cornered and desperate, in the particular way powerful men get desperate when they feel their power actually slipping from the shape they've always known it to be, had made a phone call of his own, not to a lawyer, to a man named Colonel Warren Taft. That call was made at 2:34 in the morning, voice low and urgent. And it was the first move in a chess game Maya hadn't known she was already sitting across the board from. She found out at 0600. The knock on her door came from Commander Hatch. He was in full dress uniform, and he never wore full dress for administrative matters. Behind him stood a man she didn't recognize. Civilian clothes, military posture, the specific, controlled stillness of someone who worked in spaces that didn't appear on organizational charts. Handler Carter. Hatch's voice was careful in a way it had never been careful with her before. "We need to talk." She was already dressed. She had been since 0430. "Sir." She stepped aside and let them in. Rex moved immediately to the far wall and sat. His eyes tracked to the civilian with the focus of a targeting system that has just acquired something worth tracking. The civilian sat down in her chair at her desk without asking. That told her something about how he'd been briefed and how little he thought she was going to object to it. "I understand there was an incident last night," he said. The voice was neutral and processed calibrated to reveal nothing. "There was," Maya said. She kept her eyes on him, not on Hatch. "A superior officer placed a loaded firearm against the base of my skull. I have 47 minutes of audio documentation currently with my JAG representative." Not a flicker. "These things can be complicated," the civilian said. "Operational units under stress, long deployments, personnel dynamics that are difficult to capture in." "What are you offering?" Maya said. The civilian paused a fraction of a second, the pause of a man who prepared for resistance and didn't expect it to arrive this fast. "A lateral transfer," he said. "A positive performance notation. Rex remains assigned to you. All documentation from the past 6 weeks sealed under operational security review." He spread his hand slightly, "Including the recording." Maya stared at him. "You want me to hand over the recording?" "We'd like you to understand that its unmanaged release could compromise ongoing operations significantly above your clearance level." She held his gaze and ran the calculation. Clearance level. Ongoing operations. Pruitt had been on 3 deployments, all classified. Whatever Bravo 7 was doing in the field, whatever was in those mission files that had never crossed her desk despite her nominal inclusion on the team, someone needed it to stay buried. Somehow, her recording of a drunk sergeant threatening her with a firearm had become leverage in something much larger than one corridor at 2:17 in the morning. "I'd like to contact my JAG representative," she said. The civilian's expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes, the micro-expression of a man recalibrating. Quick, professional, nearly invisible. "Of course," he said. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, not Hatch, not this civilian, not Colonel Warren Taft, wherever he'd been sleeping when his phone rang, was that Maya had sent that file at 2:31 a.m., before she went to sleep, before any knock on any door, before any civilian in civilian clothes could be mobilized and positioned in her chair. Sharon Vega had received it, had flagged it, had forwarded it to the Naval Inspector General's office at 3:47 a.m. Because Sharon Vega had been waiting for exactly this kind of file from exactly this unit for 8 months. Not because of Maya specifically, because of a pattern. 4 female personnel in Bravo 7's extended operational history. 4 transfers. 4 sealed files. 4 positive performance notations that preceded careers that quietly dissolved within 18 months. Maya hadn't known that when she arrived at this unit. She hadn't known she was the 5th. She found out 40 minutes later, sitting across from Sharon Vega on a secure video call, Rex at her feet. Commander Hatch pointedly excluded from the building. "How long?" Maya asked. Her voice was completely steady. She was running on no sleep, and something that wasn't quite anger. Something more precise than that. Something with edges and a shape. "The pattern goes back 6 years, Sharon said. Her face on the screen was careful, professional, but Maya could hear it underneath the particular tension of someone who has been building toward a case for a very long time and just watched the last piece arrive. Taft is the connecting thread in every transfer, every sealed file. He's not protecting Pruitt specifically. Pruitt is just the most recent instrument. Protecting what? A program. A specific series of operations that Bravo 7 has been running off-book for 3 years. Sharon paused. The women who were transferred weren't transferred because they couldn't perform Maya. They were transferred because they were asking questions, small questions, the kind that seem like operational curiosity and are actually the beginning of someone figuring out what's actually happening in the field. Maya thought about her missing briefing pages, the kennel violations, the systematic structure of the hostility, not personal, not random, but designed. Designed to exhaust. Designed to give someone a clean, documented rationale for removal. She thought about the operation where Coda died, the building, the Eastern Corridor, the call she had supposedly made. She thought about who had written those mission parameters. Sharon. Her voice slowed. Bravo 7's third deployment, who drafted the operational framework. The silence on the other end lasted too long. Maya, I can't discuss that on this channel. Then I need to see you in person. She leaned forward. Because I think this is connected. I think what happened to me 18 months ago and what's happening right now are the same story with the same people in it. And if I'm right... She stopped, breathed. If I'm right, the recording from last night is the smallest piece of everything. Sharon Vega looked at her through the screen for a long moment. Then she said quietly and with great precision, "Can you be in my office by 1400? Yes. Bring everything, not just last night, everything you have from the past 18 months. Maya looked down at Rex. He was watching her with that absolute steadiness she had come to understand as its own language. Not commands, not signals. Whatever this is, I'm with you. Okay, she said. She ended the call. Sat still for exactly 1 minute. Then she opened her file, the real file, the one she kept encrypted on a drive that had never once touched a military network, and she began going through it, methodically. The way she did everything. Names, dates, mission designations. The operational framework of a deployment that had been blamed on her and signed off by people who already knew exactly what the truth was. 1 hour in, she found it. A signature on a pre-mission assessment. A name she recognized not from Bravo 7, not from any person in this building, but from a congressional hearing she had watched from a hospital bed 18 months ago, 3 weeks after the building fell. Her hand stopped moving. Rex was at her side before she'd registered standing up. She read the name twice, then a third time, because if this signature meant what she thought it meant, if the chain of accountability ran where she now believed it ran, then Dale Pruitt pressing a weapon to the back of her skull had been the least dangerous thing that happened to her in the past 18 months. And the people she was about to put this in front of were going to have a choice. Let the truth out cleanly, or try to stop it. She already knew which one they would choose. She already knew she was ready for that, too. She clipped Rex's lead, tucked the encrypted drive into her jacket pocket, and walked out the door toward whatever came next. Not running, not hesitating. Moving forward with the particular steadiness of someone who has already decided that the only direction worth moving in is straight through the fire. The drive to Sharon Vega's office took 40 minutes. Maya spent every single one of them in silence. Rex in the back seat, the encrypted drive in her jacket pocket, pressing against her ribs like something with a pulse. She had found the name at 0847. By 0900, she had cross-referenced it against 3 separate documents, the pre-mission assessment, a logistics authorization from the same week, and a personnel memo she had almost deleted 6 months ago. Almost. Some instinct had made her keep it, and she had learned a long time ago to trust that instinct the same way she trusted Rex completely, and without needing to understand exactly why. The name was Congressman Gerald Marsh, senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, 12 years in office. Impeccable national security credentials. The kind of man whose name appeared on defense appropriations bills and veterans legislation, and the kind of patriotic press releases that made local news in election years, and never said anything that could be used against him. His signature was on the pre-mission operational framework for the deployment where Coda died. Not oversight. Not committee review. Direct participation in the mission's strategic design, which was not something a sitting congressman was authorized to do, under any framework Maya had ever been trained on, under any legal structure she could find, under any interpretation of any statute she had spent 4 hours searching after she got out of that hospital. She had buried it at the time because she was 29 years old and recovering from a collapsed lung, and she had been officially blamed for a mission's failure, and she had understood with a clarity that left no room for comfort, that nobody in any position of authority was going to help her prove otherwise. So she had kept the document, put it in the encrypted file, come back, and waited for Bravo 7 to do exactly what it did because she had known they would. Because they always did. Sharon Vega met her at the door personally. That was the first signal that the 3:47 a.m. forward to the Naval Inspector General had landed harder than Maya anticipated. The second signal was the man sitting at the conference table. Late 50s, civilian suit, but the posture of someone who had worn a uniform for a long time before the suit. A leather portfolio open in front of him, and a yellow legal pad already covered in handwriting, and the specific expression of a man who has been waiting for something and is now looking directly at it. "Handler Carter," Sharon said carefully. "This is Special Agent Dennis Rourke, Naval Criminal Investigative Service." Maya stood still for exactly 1 second. Then she walked to the table, sat down, and looked at Rourke. "How long have you been working this?" she said. Rourke glanced at Sharon. Sharon sat. Rourke looked back at Maya. 14 months. She absorbed that. 14 months. She had been building her file for 18. For 8 of those months, they had been running parallel, invisible to each other, pulling thread from opposite ends of the same knot. "The 4 women before me," she said. "We were aware of 3 of the 4 when you were assigned to Bravo 7. You didn't flag my assignment. We didn't have confirmation the pattern was deliberate versus systemic negligence." He said it without flinching, which she respected and found infuriating in equal measure. "We needed documented evidence of active suppression." She looked at him. "You needed another incident." He didn't deny it. "What you sent at 2:31 this morning changes the nature of what we have," he said, tapping his legal pad. "Combined with your 6 weeks of documentation, we have a pattern, a mechanism, and an event on tape." He paused. "And now you're telling me there's more." Maya pulled the encrypted drive from her jacket pocket and set it on the table between them. The room went quiet, in the specific way that happens when an object carries more weight than its size suggests. "His signature is on the pre-mission framework for Operation Harrow," she said. "The deployment 18 months ago. The one where 2 operators and a K-9 died, and I was cited for handler error." She kept her voice even. "Congressman Gerald Marsh. Direct participation in the mission's strategic design. Not advisory. Not oversight. Design." Sharon inhaled, quiet, controlled. Rourke didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the drive. "You've had this for 18 months, he said. "I had it, and no channel I trusted to bring it through. I was 29 and officially at fault for a mission that killed my partner, and I understood very clearly that the people with authority to investigate it were the people who needed it buried." She paused. "So I came back. I documented everything. I waited for them to do exactly what they did, because I knew they would." Rourke looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not softness, something more precise than that. Recognition. The specific look of someone recalibrating not just their strategy, but their understanding of exactly who they're sitting across from. "The recording goes to obstruction, coercion, and criminal threatening," he said. "What's on that drive, if it holds what you're describing, goes to something significantly larger. Unauthorized congressional involvement in classified operational planning," Maya said. "And if the operational failure was predictable from the framework, which I believe it was, then there's an argument for criminal negligence resulting in the deaths of military personnel." She said it cleanly, without heat in her voice, though the heat was absolutely there, running underneath, pressurized and controlled the way everything in her ran. Rourke picked up his pen. "Walk me through it, everything. Start with the day you were assigned to Operation Harrow." She started talking. It took 2 hours and 20 minutes. Rex slept through most of it, which she found obscurely comforting. His ability to rest completely when she needed to be sharp, his absolute trust that she had whatever was happening fully handled. She talked through the mission briefing, the framework anomalies she'd noticed, but couldn't question through proper channels the night of the operation itself. The building. Coda. The 2 operators, Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt, no relation to Dale, who had families that still believed their deaths were the result of a junior handler's bad call. She talked about the hospital, the official report. The language used to describe her performance as deficient in ways specific enough to sound credible and vague enough to be impossible to disprove without the documents she had just placed on this table. She talked about coming back, about Bravo 7, 6 weeks of documented harassment building toward 2:17 in the morning, and a gun barrel, and a drunk man who had absolutely no idea he was the last piece of a structure that had been built on rot long before he picked up that weapon. When she finished, the legal pad was full. Rourke had gone through 4 pages. Sharon had stopped taking notes somewhere around the 90-minute mark and was just listening, hands flat on the table. Her expression, the careful neutral of a lawyer, sitting with something bigger than she was prepared for. "The operative who directed you to move Coda into the Eastern Corridor," Rourke said. "The order that was later cited as handler error. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Keyes," Maya said. "He gave me a direct verbal order. I followed it. The ceiling came down 40 seconds later." She paused. "Keyes's after-action report stated that I had moved Coda without authorization." "Keyes is currently assigned to the Pentagon," Sharon said. She was looking at something on her tablet. "Senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs." Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Rourke closed his legal pad, and the sound of it was somehow final. Like a door. "I need to bring this up the chain today," he said. "When it moves fast, and the people it moves toward have resources and institutional relationships that—" "I know what they have," Maya said. "I've been living inside their institutional relationships for 18 months. She met his eyes. "I know what I'm doing." He nodded, once stood up, reached for the encrypted drive. "I'll need to copy this and return the original." "Keep the original," she said. "I have 3 copies in 3 separate locations." He almost smiled. "Of course you do." She drove back to base with Rex and the specific, disorienting lightness of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long that its absence feels like a change in air pressure. She had handed it over. Not given it up, handed it over to the right people, through the right channel, with documentation solid enough to make the path forward real. She should have felt lighter. She felt watchful instead. Because she had been right about one thing from the beginning. The people on the other end of this were going to fight. They always did. And they had already moved fast, the civilian in her quarters, before 0600 Taft mobilized overnight, the offer of a clean transfer delivered like a business proposition. That speed told her something important. They were scared. Scared people with power and resources do not sit still. She was in the parking lot when her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at it for 1 beat. Then she picked up. "Carter." The voice was male, older, controlled in a way that didn't sound natural, the control of someone suppressing urgency. "You don't know me. My name is Thomas Webb. Marcus Webb was my son." Maya stopped walking. Rex stopped with her. The world went very quiet. "Mr. Webb," she said carefully, "I've been contacted by an investigator." His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it. 18 months of grief that had been pointed in the wrong direction, and the particular raw quality of a man who is only now beginning to understand that. "He told me there was new information about the operation. About what really happened." A breath. "He told me your name." She sat down on the hood of her car. Just sat. Rex pressed against her leg. "Marcus was a good operator," she said, because that was the truest thing she could say, and it needed to be the first thing. "I know that." His voice cracked on the second word and held on the third. "They told us it was mismanagement, that a handler made a bad call. We believed them, Ms. Carter. For 18 months we believed them." He stopped. She heard him gathering himself. "My wife stopped speaking at the dinner table. My daughter transferred colleges 3 times. We were angry at the wrong person." The weight of it pressed against her chest. "Mr. Webb, I'm not calling to apologize," he said quickly, and she understood from that exactly how many times he'd rehearsed this call. "The investigator said my testimony about the after-action briefing we received might matter. I need to know if that's true. I need to know if this is real." Maya looked at the sky. "It's real," she said. "Your testimony matters. What they told you matters. The specific language they used, the way they delivered it, it's part of the pattern. And patterns are what make a case instead of an allegation. Silence on the line. Then, will you tell me what actually happened that night? She thought about what he deserved to hear. She thought about the Eastern Corridor in Coda, and 40 seconds, and the sound of a building coming down on people who had trusted the chain of command that had already decided their lives were acceptable variables. Yes, she said. I'll tell you everything. She talked for 40 minutes. When she finished, Thomas Webb was quiet for a long time. She's going to want to hear this too, Marcus's wife. Can I give her your number? Yes, Maya said without hesitating. She hung up and sat on the hood of her car, and Rex put his head in her lap, and she let him, and she stared at the middle distance and felt the full shape of what she was doing. Not just what she was fighting, but what she was building piece by piece, document by document out of the wreckage of everything that had been blamed on her. It was going to cost her more. She knew that. The call to Thomas Webb would get back to Taft's people. The drive she'd handed Rourke would land on desks that would trigger responses she couldn't fully predict. Congressman Marsh had staffers and lawyers and 18 years of institutional insulation, and none of that was going to dissolve quietly because one handler with an encrypted drive walked into an NCIS office. It was going to get worse before it got better. She had known that from the beginning. She had built for that. She clipped Rex's lead and walked back inside. What came at 0600 the next morning was 2 uniformed MPs at her door and orders to report to Commander Hatch's office immediately for what the paperwork described as a formal operational review. She read it once, set it on her bunk, looked at Rex. Okay, she said. Here we go. She dressed in full uniform because the way you walk into a room like that matters. She was going to walk in looking exactly like what she was, the best handler in this unit, the most documented, the most prepared, the last person on this earth they should have pressed a gun to. She walked into Hatch's office at 0603 and understood immediately that this was not a conversation, it was a tribunal. Hatch sat behind his desk in full-dress uniform, which he never wore for administrative reviews, which told her someone above him had told him to wear it. On his left sat Colonel Warren Taft, the man whose name she had connected to 4 transfers and 6 years of institutional cover. On Taft's left sat a woman in her 40s, sharp eyes, a JAG insignia that told Maya everything she needed to know. This was not Sharon Vega's ally. This was Sharon Vega's institutional opposite, a lawyer who worked for the machine, not against it. On Hatch's right sat Dale Pruitt, not in restraints, not under escort, in uniform, hands folded on the table, with the careful stillness of a man who had been coached overnight on exactly how to sit and exactly what expression to wear. Maya stood in the doorway for 2 full seconds, long enough to read every person in that room completely. And then she walked in and sat down across from all of them and put her hands flat on the table and waited. Rex was not with her. The paperwork had specified the K-9 was not authorized for this meeting. She had noted that detail with interest. That kind of specification told you what the other side was afraid of. Apparently, they were afraid of a 74-pound dog sitting quietly beside his handler, which told her they understood on some level what Rex's presence represented. Control, documentation, preparation, things they were about to try very hard to dismantle. Handler Carter, Hatch began. This review has been convened to address serious concerns regarding your conduct and the operational security implications of unauthorized recordings made within this facility. I'd like my JAG representative present, Maya said. Lieutenant Commander Vega has been notified. Is she in this building? A pause. She is en route. Then I'll wait. Maya folded her hands on the table, mirroring Pruitt's posture with the precision of someone who knows exactly what that mirroring communicates. I'm sure everyone here understands the importance of proper legal representation in a formal review. Taft leaned forward. He was a large man, the kind of large built from decades of physical authority and the expectation of deference. When he spoke, it was the voice of someone who had not been told no in a very long time. Handler Carter, I want to be direct. What happened in this facility last night represents a serious breach of unit cohesion and operational bashinanye. Colonel. She said it quietly, cleanly. I'm going to stop you there because I'm not going to participate in a characterization of last night's events before my representative is present. She looked at him steadily. And I think you're aware that anything said in this room before she arrives creates additional documentation problems for the people who are already facing significant documentation problems. Silence. Taft sat back. The JAG attorney across the table was writing something on her notepad. Pruitt was looking at a fixed point above Maya's left shoulder with the expression of a man working very hard to appear calm and achieving only the appearance of trying. Hatch said, "We can wait." They waited 17 minutes. Maya spent every one of them in silence. She wasn't performing composure. She was genuinely in it, the trained stillness that had gotten her through 8 years of field operations and 18 months of institutional war, and 2:17 in the morning with a barrel against her skull. She breathed. She read the room in micro increments. She watched Taft check his phone twice and recross his legs once the behavior of a man receiving updates from outside this room. She watched Pruitt, who did not move at all, which told her he had been very specifically instructed not to. Sharon Vega arrived at 06:21 with a second person. A man in his 50s. Civilian. Briefcase. The measured walk of someone who bills by the hour and has never once been hurried into a room in his life. Handler Carter, Sharon said, sitting beside her. This is Alan Merritt, co-counsel. Taft looked at Merritt. The look lasted 1 second before being replaced by his default expression of command authority. But Maya caught it. Recognition. And whatever that recognition meant, it had shifted something in the air of this room. Colonel, Merritt said pleasantly, setting his briefcase on the table. Shall we proceed? The review that followed lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. In the first hour, Taft's team attempted to establish that Maya's recording violated operational security protocols and that her contact with NCIS constituted unauthorized disclosure of classified unit information. Merritt dismantled both arguments with the methodical patience of a man building with very precise tools, citing specific articles, specific precedents, specific language from the UCMJ that the opposing JAG attorney had clearly hoped she wouldn't have to face this morning. In the second hour, Pruitt gave his account of the previous night. He had clearly rehearsed it. He used words like escalated and perceived threat and emotional instability. And Maya sat through every word of it with her hands flat on the table, and her face completely still, because she knew Sharon knew. Merritt knew. And the recording knew that every word Pruitt said was building a wall he was going to have to climb back over. Sergeant Pruitt, Merritt said, when Pruitt finished, voice still pleasant, the pleasantness of a man holding every card and choosing not to show them yet. You've described the events of last night as a response to Handler Carter's provocative behavior. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. And the firearm. Pruitt's jaw tightened. I was carrying a standard sidearm that you placed against Handler Carter's skull. Merritt tilted his head slightly. That's on the recording. The sound of metal contact. Then your voice. Then her response. Very clear. He paused. Would you like to revise your characterization of the events? A controlled exhale came from Taft's side of the table. Pruitt said nothing. Merritt made a note and moved on. The third hour was when everything broke open. Merritt placed a document on the table, slid it across to Taft and said simply, I'd like to discuss Operation Harrow. The temperature in the room changed instantly and completely. Hatch went very still. The opposing JAG attorney looked at the document, then at Taft, then at her notepad, a sequence that told Maya clearly she was encountering something she had not been briefed to handle. Taft picked up the document, read the first page, and set it back down with a control that cost him something visible. That document, he began, is part of the NCIS case file formally opened at 04:12 this morning, Merritt said, in which Handler Carter is a cooperating witness. which means her protected status under federal witness cooperation protocols has been active since before this review was convened. He paused one beat. Which means this review as currently structured represents a potential violation of federal witness protection statutes. Sharon put a second document on the table. The opposing JAG attorney picked it up, read 3 lines and said quietly, very quietly, the voice of a professional encountering a wall she hadn't expected. "Colonel, I need a moment with you." Taft stood. They stepped out. Pruitt sat at the table looking like a man watching his house burn down from a chair he couldn't get up from. Hatch looked at Maya for the first time in an hour. Really looked. And what she saw in his face was not anger, not defiance. Something closer to exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of a man who had known for a long time that the thing he was standing in the middle of was wrong, and had chosen the path of least resistance over and over until the path ran out. "How long did you know?" Maya asked. Quiet. Just the two of them, functionally, with Pruitt a ghost at the far end of the table. Hatch's mouth tightened. "I'm not asking for the record," she said. "I'm asking you directly. The files that disappeared, the kennel reports. You knew what Pruitt was doing. How long?" A long silence. Pruitt stared at the wall. "Since the second week," Hatch said. His voice was flat and old. She absorbed that, filed it, didn't let it move through her yet. "Did you know about Operation Harrow, about Marsh's involvement?" He looked at her. Something in his eyes that might have been the beginning of honesty arriving about 2 years too late. "I knew the official report on Harrow was incomplete." "Did you know it blamed me for a call I didn't make?" The pause lasted exactly long enough to be an answer. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she looked away because she had what she needed, and she didn't want to give him the relief of her anger. Anger would have looked like vulnerability. She had not survived 18 months by being vulnerable in rooms like this. Taft and the JAG attorney came back in. Taft sat. He was carrying himself differently now, the authority still present, but tighter pressurized the posture of a man who has just been told by his lawyer that the ground under him is thinner than he believed. "We'd like to propose an adjournment," the JAG attorney said, "to allow all parties to review the current scope of—" "No." Everyone looked at Maya. Sharon put a light hand on her arm, a touch of quiet question. Maya didn't move. "We're not adjourning," she said. "We're finishing this today. Because I have been inside this system for 18 months, waiting for a room where the truth was on the table. It's on the table right now. And I am not walking out of here so the people in this building can spend another day figuring out how to put it back in a drawer." She looked at Taft directly. Operation Harrow. Congressman Marsh's signature on the operational framework. Lieutenant Colonel Keyes's false after-action report. Sergeant Pruitt's conduct over 6 weeks, and specifically the events of 2/17 this morning. All of it is documented. All of it is transferred to NCIS. It is not going back into a sealed file. She let that sit. "What I am offering is cooperation. My full cooperation with the investigation. My testimony. My documentation. In exchange for the formal correction of my service record and the formal reopening of the Operation Harrow findings." "That's not something this review has the authority to," Taft began. "I know," Maya said, "which is why I'm saying it to you instead of through you. What you can do, Colonel, is pick up the phone and call the people who have that authority, and tell them that Handler Maya Carter is sitting in a room with enough documentation to make the next 6 months of their lives considerably more complicated than the next 6 minutes of this conversation." Taft stared at her. She stared back, and then something happened that Maya had not allowed herself to predict, because predicting it would have felt too much like hope, and she had protected herself from hope for a long time. Taft reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, stood up, and walked out of the room. Pruitt made a sound half-word, half-exhale. "He's not actually—" "Yes, he is," Merritt said mildly, making a note. The call lasted 11 minutes. Maya sat with her hands on the table and breathed and did not let her face do anything. Rex was in his kennel on the other side of this building, and she could feel his absence the way you feel the absence of something that has become structural. Not painful exactly, just present. She thought about what she was going to say to him when this was over. Probably nothing. Probably she would just clip his lead and walk and let him do what he always did understand without being told. Taft came back in, sat down, put his phone on the table face down. The JAG attorney said, "The Deputy Judge Advocate General's office has agreed to a preliminary hearing on the Operation Harrow findings. Timeline to be determined. Handler Carter's service record will be flagged for formal review pending the outcome." She was reading from notes she had taken during those 11 minutes. Sergeant Pruitt will be placed on administrative suspension pending the criminal investigation into the events of this morning. Pruitt's chair scraped back. You can't... Sergeant, Taft said at once. One word. Absolute and completely final. Pruitt went silent. But his hands on the table were shaking. And for the first time since Maya had arrived at this unit, Dale Pruitt looked exactly like what he was, a man whose protection had just been formally and permanently withdrawn. Sharon leaned close and said quietly, "You okay?" Maya thought about it honestly. She thought about Coda. About Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt in a building in a country she still could not name in any document. About 18 months of carrying a file that nobody wanted to touch. About Thomas Webb at a dinner table that had gone silent, and his wife and his daughter who had transferred colleges 3 times. "Not yet," she said. "But I'm getting there." The proceedings concluded at 10:47. Maya walked out of the building into the open air and stopped and just breathed the specific involuntary breath of someone who has been holding something for a very long time. Her phone buzzed. Rourke. "We've confirmed Marsh's signature is authentic," he said without preamble. "We're moving to subpoena his office records by end of week. Keyes has been notified he's a person of interest. He's already lawyered up, which is its own kind of confirmation." A pause. "You did good today, Carter. What about the 4 women before me?" "We're in contact with 3. The 4th has declined to participate, which is her right. Their records are all part of the review." She stood with that. 3 other women. 3 careers quietly crushed by the same machine who were now going to have their names attached to something real instead of something buried. "Good," she said. She went to get Rex. He was in his kennel when she arrived, and his reaction when she opened the gate was not the dramatic physical joy of a dog reunited with his person after a long separation. It was something quieter and more specific. He walked out, pressed his shoulder against her leg, and looked up at her for exactly 3 seconds, with the absolute attention that had always felt to Maya, less like an animal looking at a handler, and more like one person looking at another and saying, "I see you. Whatever happened in there, we're still in it together." She knelt down and put both hands on his face. "Okay, Rex," she said quietly. "The next part is going to be harder." He held her gaze, steady, unafraid. She was not wrong about what was coming. Marsh's lawyers would be the most expensive in Washington. Keyes would construct an alternate account with the precision of a man who had spent 18 years navigating institutional cover. And Taft's suspended, not dismantled, would not disappear quietly. The machine had not been destroyed this morning. It had been cracked. The light was getting in, but there was still a long way between light getting in and the whole structure coming down. She knew that. She was built for that. She stood up, clipped Rex's lead, and walked out into the afternoon with work to do and calls to make, and a service record that had been wrong for 18 months now formally moving toward being corrected. But she let herself feel it just for the length of that walk, just for the steady rhythm of Rex's pace beside her, the first real evidence that victory was possible. For a woman who had built everything, she was out of discipline and documentation, and the absolute refusal to stop moving forward, that was enough. That was more than enough. 6 weeks is a long time until you're living inside them. Then, they move like water fast in some places, brutally slow in others, and always with the sense that something underneath the surface is moving faster than what you can see above it. The preliminary hearing had been scheduled for a Tuesday in November, 6 weeks out. And in the first 2 of those weeks, Marsh's legal team filed 3 motions to delay. 3. Each one more elaborately constructed than the last, each one citing procedural grounds that Merritt dismantled in writing. Within 48 hours, each one designed not to succeed, but to exhaust, to make the process so slow and so expensive and so grinding that someone on Maya's side would eventually decide the cost was too high. That was the strategy. It had worked on 4 women before her. Keyes gave a statement through his attorney in week 2, characterizing the NCIS investigation as politically motivated. That phrase, politically motivated, had been so precisely calibrated to the current media environment that Maya read it in the brief Rourke forwarded and felt a cold, clear admiration for whoever had written it. It wasn't Keyes. Keyes hadn't written a thing that good in his life. Someone smarter was behind it, someone whose fingerprints weren't on any document she had yet. Taft, on administrative suspension, had apparently spent his first week of freedom on the phone. By day 10, she was receiving second-hand reports of pressure being applied to 2 members of the review panel from the direction of people whose names she recognized from defense appropriations records. The machine was fighting back exactly the way she had told herself it would. What she hadn't fully anticipated was how public it was about to become. The story broke on a Thursday. Not from NCIS, not from Sharon's office, not from anyone Maya had spoken to. It came from Thomas Webb, who gave a 20-minute interview to a journalist he had trusted for 11 years on the record about his son and the dinner table that had gone quiet, and the 18 months his family had spent directing their grief at the wrong person. He hadn't named Maya specifically. He hadn't needed to. The journalist had done that work herself. By Friday morning, the story had a shape the internet recognized immediately, and could not stop sharing a shape that was older than the internet, older than the military, the shape of an institution protecting itself at the cost of the people inside it. Maya found out when Sharon called at 06:14. "It's out," Sharon said. Maya sat on the edge of her bunk. Rex lifted his head. "How bad?" "It's not bad." Sharon's voice carried something Maya needed a second to identify: carefully contained relief, the kind you hold very still because you're not yet sure it will hold. "It's accurate. Webb was careful. The journalist was careful. It's the truth, Maya. Just the truth presented cleanly." And Marsh. His office released a statement at midnight. Denies any unauthorized involvement in classified operations. Standard language. A pause. His approval rating dropped 11 points between midnight and 6 a.m. Maya looked at Rex. Rex looked back at her. "Okay," she said. "There's something else." Sharon's voice shifted. The voice she used when she was delivering information she wasn't sure how Maya would receive. "Marcus Webb's wife called Rourke's office yesterday. She wants to testify formally at the hearing." Maya closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. She thought about a woman who had stopped speaking at dinner tables. About the specific courage it takes to walk into an official proceeding and put your grief on the record when the institution that caused it is the same one running the room. "Good," Maya said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. She didn't fix it. "That's good. There's a third thing." Sharon said it carefully, which meant it was significant. "Lieutenant Colonel Keyes has requested a meeting, through Merritt. Proper channels, written request, everything documented." A beat. "He's not requesting immunity. He's not requesting leniency." Another beat. "He's requesting a conversation with you specifically." The silence that followed lasted long enough that Rex stood up and pressed against Maya's leg. She felt the warmth of him, that specific grounding warmth, and breathed through it. "Set it up," she said. She met Raymond Keyes in a JAG conference room on a Wednesday afternoon. Merritt present. Recording running with Keyes's full knowledge and written consent. Both conditions Merritt had insisted on and Keyes had agreed to without negotiation, which told Maya something before the man even sat down. Keyes looked like someone who had spent 6 weeks not sleeping. He was still straight-backed, still carrying himself with the residue of 18 years of command authority. But it sat differently on him now, the way a coat sits on someone who has lost weight. Slightly wrong. slightly too large for the person wearing it. He sat across from her. He looked at her for a long moment, the way you look at someone when you're trying to locate a thing you put down a long time ago and aren't sure you'll recognize anymore. Then he said, "I gave you that order." No preamble, no lawyer's construction, just the words placed on the table between them like something he'd been holding in both hands for 18 months and had finally exhaustedly put down. "I told you to move Coda into the Eastern Corridor. The after-action report stated you acted without authorization." He held her gaze. "That was false. I wrote it false." Maya's hands stayed flat on the table, completely still. "Why are you telling me this now?" she said. "Because Thomas Webb gave that interview." He said it without hesitation, like he'd rehearsed the answer not to make it sound good, but to make sure he actually said it. "I heard it. I sat in my car in my driveway for 40 minutes afterward, and I thought about Webb, and I thought about Darnell Pruitt, and I thought about you in that hospital." His jaw moved. "And I thought about the thing I wrote." He stopped, breathed. "I have 3 daughters. The oldest wants to apply to the Naval Academy." He looked at the table. "I couldn't look at that and keep going the way I was going." Maya studied him. The fatigue was real. The shame was real. She had learned over years of reading people in high-pressure environments how to distinguish the performance of an emotion from the actual weight of it. Keyes was carrying the actual weight. That didn't make what he'd done forgivable. It made it useful. "The mission framework," she said. "Marsh's involvement. You knew. I knew he had input on the strategic parameters. I was told it was advisory capacity. I didn't push because I had been very clearly informed that pushing would end certain things for me." He looked up. "That is not an excuse. I want to be clear, I am not offering it as one." "What are you offering?" "Full testimony. Everything I know about Marsh's role. Taft's role, the specific chain of decisions that produced the Harrow framework. The names of the other officers present when those decisions were made." He paused. "It won't be comfortable for significant people." "No," Maya agreed. "It won't." "Will it be enough?" He asked it with the rawness of a man who genuinely doesn't know and genuinely needs to. No performance in it. Just the stripped-down question. She thought about Marcus Webb, about Coda, about 18 months of a service record with the wrong name attached to the wrong call, and 2 families sitting with grief they'd been handed like a signed document. "For the record, yes," she said. "For Marcus Webb's family, that's not mine to answer." Keyes nodded. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a document across the table. "This is my sworn statement. I had it prepared before I came in." His voice stayed level, but the effort it took was visible, and Maya found she did not need to harden herself against it the way she'd hardened herself against everything else in this building for 6 weeks. "I wanted you to see it before it went anywhere official. I owed you that much." She looked at the document. "Read the first page, the second." It was thorough, damaging, and true. She could feel the truth of it the way you feel something you already know and have been waiting for someone else to finally say out loud. She slid it back across the table. "Give it to Rourke," she said. Keyes picked it up, held it for 1 second, then set it in his folder. He looked at her. "For what it's worth," he said slowly, "you were the best handler I ever saw in the field. Coda trusted you completely. That kind of trust doesn't happen by accident." Maya said nothing for a moment. "I know," she said finally. "That's what made the report so easy for everyone to believe. Because nobody who actually watched us work thought I'd move him without a reason." Keyes flinched. Small, but real. She stood up. Merritt stood with her. Keyes remained seated, and she understood that he would sit there for a while after they left, not because he had nowhere to go, but because some accounting was happening inside him that required stillness to complete. She didn't feel sorry for him. But she didn't feel satisfaction either. What she felt was something more functional than either the specific clarity of a person who has just watched a key piece of a structure shift into place and knows exactly what it changes. On the drive back, Merritt said, "That statement alone changes the complexity of the hearing significantly." "I know," Keyes's testimony combined with your documentation and the Webb family's account creates a evidentiary record that Marsh's attorneys are going to find very difficult to address without merit. She kept her eyes on the road. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're not relieved. I'm focused, she said. Relief is for after. He nodded once, looked out the window, and said nothing more. She appreciated that about him. The ability to read when a person needed silence and respect it without filling it. What she was actually thinking about was the name Sharon hadn't said in the hallway. The one Sharon had referenced during the hearing when she'd said quietly, "There's a name in there I wasn't expecting." The name that was apparently going to require a separate investigation. Maya had filed it and kept breathing and had not asked again because she had understood from Sharon's expression that it needed to be a different conversation in a different room with more control around it than a crowded courthouse hallway allowed. That conversation came 2 days later. Sharon called at 800 and said, "Are you alone?" Yes. Keyes's testimony named someone in addition to Marsh and Taft, someone whose connection to Operation Harrow we were not aware of. A pause. Senator Richard Boyle, ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He was at the table when the Harrow framework was finalized. Not Marsh's committee, the Senate side. A second committee member. Maya sat with that. 2 sitting members of Congress, both on armed services committees. Both with their signatures directly or indirectly connected to a classified operational framework that had gotten 2 operators and a K-9 killed and buried a handler's career under a false report. That's not a cover-up, Maya said slowly. That's a program. That's what Rourke's team believes, Sharon said. Harrow wasn't a one-time decision made by one congressman trying to insert himself into an operation. It was the tail end of a 3-year off-book arrangement between Bravo 7 and specific members of 2 congressional committees who were using the unit's operational access to direct missions that served. We're still mapping this interests that were not exclusively national security in nature. Maya stood up without realizing she'd done it. Rex was at her side immediately. The 4 women who were transferred, she said. They weren't just asking questions about unit dynamics. No. We believe at least 2 of them encountered operational anomalies that touched the edges of what Bravo 7 was actually running. The transfers were the cleanup mechanism. Sharon's voice was careful, precise the way it got when she was navigating something that could move in multiple directions at once. Maya, what you walked into at that unit, they weren't harassing you because you were a woman in a hostile environment. That was real, but it was also a mechanism. They needed you gone before you got close enough to see what you were already standing next to. The silence between them had weight. The encrypted drive, Maya said. Rourke's team has been working through it for 3 days. The Marsh signature is the most direct evidence. But there are 3 other documents on that drive that, in context of Keyes's testimony, point toward Boyle's involvement in the mission authorization chain. Sharon paused. You kept everything. I kept everything, Maya confirmed. Even things you didn't know were important. Especially those. Sharon exhaled a long, controlled breath that carried everything she wasn't saying. The hearing is still on for Tuesday. Boyle's name doesn't change the structure of what we're presenting, but it changes the scale of what follows it. Rourke is coordinating with DOJ. This is no longer a military discipline matter, Maya. This is... I know what it is, Maya said. I've known what it was since I found Marsh's signature. I just didn't know how many names were attached to it. Are you prepared for what happens when Boyle's name becomes public? Because it will become public. Probably within 48 hours of the hearing's conclusion. Maya thought about Pruitt pressing a gun to her skull. She thought about 4 women whose careers had been quietly erased. She thought about a table at which 2 congressmen had sat and approved a mission framework, knowing the risks and signing off anyway, because the people executing it were operators, and operators were expendable in ways that congressional signatures were not. I've been preparing for this for 18 months, she said. I'm ready. There's one more thing. Sharon said it carefully, which by now Maya recognized as Sharon's signal for this is the thing that matters most right now. Diane Webb Marcus's wife, she called me this morning. She's been in contact with the families of the other operators' families, not just Thomas Webb, the Pruitt family, Darnell's mother, his sister. A pause. They want to attend the hearing together, publicly, as a group. Maya didn't speak for a moment. She thought about what that image would mean, not strategically, not tactically, just humanly. 3 families, sitting together in the same room, having found each other through the wreckage of the same lie. Tell them yes, she said. Tell them to come. The night before the hearing, Maya sat with Rex and her files, and the specific quality of silence that comes before something large and irreversible. She had been through the documents so many times that she no longer needed to look at them to know what they said. She knew the language of each one, the dates, the signatures, the careful administrative phrasing used to make catastrophic decisions sound like paperwork. She thought about the first night at Bravo 7, the way the room had pivoted at dinner, the way Pruitt had poured his coffee mid-sentence without looking at her, the way Hatch had said the word impressive like a weather forecast and moved on. She thought about filing the first incident report and watching it disappear. She thought about the red marker on her psychological evaluation. Doesn't belong here. She had been right about that, actually. Just not in the way they meant it. She didn't belong in a unit that was running off-book operations for congressional patrons while burying anyone who got close enough to see it. She had never belonged there. The tragedy wasn't that she'd been sent. The tragedy was that 4 women before her had been sent there too, and the machine had chewed through all of them without ever being made to account for a single tooth mark. Until now, Rex put his head in her lap without being asked. Tomorrow, she said to him, to herself, to the shape of everything she'd been building toward. Tomorrow we put it on the record. He pressed closer. She put her hand on him and sat in the stillness and let herself feel just briefly the full weight of what was at stake. Not just her career, not just her service record. The families in that gallery tomorrow, the 3 women who were cooperating with the investigation, the 4th who had declined, who had that right completely, and whose silence Maya understood in her bones because there had been a version of herself that could have made the same choice. The version of herself that had lain in a hospital bed at 29 with a collapsed lung and understood that nobody was coming to help her. That version of herself had kept the drive anyway. She closed her eyes, breathed. 4 counts in, hold, 4 out, 4. When she opened them, Rex was watching her with that absolute uncomplicated steadiness that had been for 18 months the most honest thing in her life. No agenda in it, no calculation. Just presence, solid and certain and completely unafraid of what the next day held. She picked up her phone and sent one message to Sharon. Ready. Sharon responded in 30 seconds. So are we. Get some sleep. She didn't sleep much. But what sleep she got was genuine rest, the kind that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having made peace with its presence. She was afraid. She had been afraid since a gun touched her skull in a corridor at 2:17 in the morning. She had been afraid in a different way since she lay in a hospital listening to a doctor explain the damage to her lung, and an officer explain the findings of a report she hadn't written. Fear had never stopped her from doing the work. It had made her more precise. That was the thing Bravo 7 had never understood about her, the thing Pruitt and Weston and Brandt had fundamentally misread. They had looked at her documentation and her composure and her refusal to react the way they wanted her to react, and they had called it coldness, they had called it inability to fit. What it actually was discipline applied to terror. What it actually was 18 months of knowing exactly what she was walking toward, and choosing to walk toward it anyway, because the alternative was letting the record stand as written. And the record was wrong. At 05:30, she got up dressed in full uniform and fed Rex with the quiet, deliberate attention she gave everything she did. She checked her documentation one final time, not because she needed to, but because the ritual of checking was itself a kind of steadying. A confirmation. I have done everything that can be done. I am as prepared as a person can be. Merritt called at 06:15. I'm outside, whenever you're ready. 2 minutes, she said. She looked at Rex. He was already at the door, lead clipped ready because he always knew. He had always known. Okay, she said. She opened the door and walked out into the morning, and what came next was going to be brutal and complicated, and fought every step of the way by people with far more resources and far more institutional protection than she had ever had. She knew that. She had known it from the beginning. She walked toward it anyway, the way she always had, the way she always would. The hearing room held 43 people when Maya walked in at 08:55 on a Tuesday morning. She counted them the way she counted everything automatically, precisely the way her mind had been trained to read any room she entered as a set of variables rather than a fixed picture. The 5-member review panel at the front, Merritt and Sharon at her left. Rourke seated in the observer section with 2 members of his NCIS team. Marsh's attorneys, 3 of them, which told her exactly how worried his people were arranged along one side with briefcases, and the particular stillness of men paid to project confidence they may or may not actually feel. And in the gallery, in the 3rd row, sitting together in a way that was clearly deliberate. Thomas Webb on the left, his wife beside him, and next to her, a woman Maya didn't recognize, but who had Darnell Pruitt's jaw and his coloring, and the specific posture of someone who has been carrying grief in their body for so long it has become part of the architecture. Darnell's sister. And beside her, a woman in her late 60s who sat with both hands folded in her lap, and her eyes already fixed on Maya when Maya entered Darnell's mother. 4 people. 2 families. One shared lie that had cost them everything. Maya looked at them for exactly 2 seconds. She didn't nod. She didn't gesture. She just looked and let them see that she knew they were there and that it mattered, and then she sat down and put her hands flat on the table and faced forward. Rex settled at her feet. Merritt had argued his presence successfully, citing his status as a documented service animal with an active working assignment. The panel had granted it after 11 minutes of discussion. Marsh's lead attorney, a man named Jeffrey Cahill, silver-haired, the practiced ease of someone who had argued in rooms like this for 30 years, had objected. The panel had overruled him. The look on Cahill's face when Rex walked in told Maya that the objection hadn't been about the dog. It had been about what the dog represented, and he had already lost that argument before the first word of testimony. The panel chair, Rear Admiral Patricia Doss, called the proceedings to order at exactly 0900. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, with the kind of authority that doesn't announce itself. It simply exists, and everyone in the room adjusts to it. Maya had done her research on Doss. She had served as a JAG officer before taking command. She had presided over 3 major disciplinary hearings in the last decade. She had a reputation for asking the questions nobody else in the room wanted to ask. "Handler Carter," Doss said. "You'll begin." Maya began. She had testified before review boards, operational inquiries, the kind of institutional proceedings designed to be exhausting so that people stop pursuing them. She knew how to sit in that chair and deliver information in language that was clean and precise and organized and impossible to dismiss without evidence. What she hadn't anticipated was how it would feel to do it with Diane Webb in the gallery behind her. She felt it when she reached the section about the Eastern Corridor, about the order Keyes had given, about moving Coda into a space that 40 seconds later became a collapse zone. She was describing the sequence with the technical precision of someone who has rehearsed it until it no longer has the power to break her open in public, and she felt from somewhere behind her left shoulder the specific quality of a woman's attention that is not just listening, but receiving, taking every word in like something owed. Maya kept her voice level. She kept her eyes on the panel. She kept going. Cahill cross-examined her for 90 minutes. He was good. She had expected him to be good. He came at the encrypted drive first, questioning the chain of custody, suggesting the documents could have been altered, using the word alleged, with the frequency of a man who has learned that repetition can do what evidence cannot. He came at her service record next, spending 40 minutes on the operation where Coda died, trying to reconstruct a version of events in which her decisions, not the framework, had produced the outcome. Maya answered every question the same way, directly, completely, with specific reference to the documentation that contradicted each reframing he attempted. She did not get angry. She did not get defensive. She did not give him a single moment of visible emotion that could be characterized as instability or bias. After the 40th question about the Eastern Corridor, Merritt said quietly but clearly, "Admiral Doss, opposing counsel, has now asked 8 variations of the same foundational question and received 8 consistent answers. I'd like to note for the record that the repetition pattern itself constitutes a form of badgering a cooperating witness under protection protocols." Doss looked at Cahill. "Move forward, counselor." Cahill moved forward. But something had shifted in the room, a calibration subtle but real, the sense of a panel that had just watched a high-priced attorney spend 90 minutes failing to find a crack in something that had no cracks in it. Maya's testimony concluded at 13:47. Doss called a 45-minute recess. In the corridor, Sharon sat beside her and said nothing for a full 2 minutes. Then, "You were perfect." "I was accurate," Maya said. "There's a difference." Sharon looked at her. "Most people can't hold those two things together under that kind of pressure. Most people aren't defending 18 months of documentation against a man who bills $400 an hour to suggest they misremembered things they photographed." Sharon almost smiled. Rex put his head in Maya's lap. She let him. "Tomorrow is Keyes," Sharon said. "I know. Are you prepared for what he's going to say? All of it, because some of it is going to be harder to hear in a room full of people than it was in a conference room with just Merritt." Maya thought about that honestly. "Yes," she said. "I've had 18 months to prepare for the truth. I'm ready for it to finally be said out loud." Day 2 of the hearing began at 0900, and Raymond Keyes walked in at 0903, and the room changed immediately. Not because of anything he did. Not because of his expression or his posture or the way he moved. It changed because of what he represented: an insider, a lieutenant colonel, a man who had been in the room when the decisions were made, who had written the report that buried Maya's career, who was now sitting down across from a panel with a sworn statement in front of him, and no attorney at his side. He had waived counsel. That detail had circulated through the room in the 40 minutes before proceedings began, and Maya had watched Cahill's team absorb it with the specific reaction of professionals encountering a development they had not built a contingency for. A man who waives counsel in a proceeding like this is either reckless or certain, and Raymond Keyes had the look of a man who is certain, not confident, not defiant, but certain in the way that people become certain after they have stopped running from something and turned around to face it. Doss addressed him directly. "Lieutenant Colonel Keyes, you understand that your testimony today is sworn as being recorded and may be used in subsequent criminal proceedings." "I understand," Keyes said. "You've chosen to proceed without legal representation." "I have." "Then please begin." Keyes began. He spoke for 6 hours. The panel called 2 recesses during that time, both at Doss's initiative, both brief, and Maya understood from watching Doss's face during the testimony that the recesses were not for fatigue. They were for the panel to review documents being introduced. For the first time, documents that Keyes produced from his folder one by one, with the methodical patience of a man who had been organizing them in his head for weeks, and was finally being allowed to put them on a table where they meant something. Maya was sequestered during Keyes's testimony per protocol. She sat in a side room with Rex and the particular quality of waiting she had gotten very good at. Not passive, not anxious, just present, ready for whatever direction the next thing came from. Sharon came out at the lunch break and sat beside her in the corridor. "He's telling all of it," Sharon said. "Everything. There are names in there that I wasn't expecting, Maya." "Boyle," Maya said. "Boyle." 3 members of Marsh's staff who were directly involved in the mission authorization chain. 2 other officers who were at the planning table for Harrow and signed off without objection. She paused. "And one more name." Maya looked at her. Sharon's expression was the most careful Maya had seen it in 2 months of working closely with a woman who was careful about everything. There is a defense contractor, Meridian Systems. They supplied the structural assessment equipment used to evaluate the building in the Harrow operation. The assessment that determined the eastern corridor was structurally sound. She stopped. Keyes testified that Senator Boyle held a significant undisclosed financial stake in Meridian Systems at the time of the operation. The corridor went very quiet. Maya heard her own breathing, slow and deliberate. 4 counts in, 4 out. The equipment failed, she said. The assessment was incomplete, possibly deliberately so. The eastern corridor's load-bearing capacity had been compromised by prior damage that the Meridian equipment either failed to detect or... Sharon stopped. Or that someone with a stake in both the contract and the mission outcome chose not to flag. Maya sat with that for a long time. Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt had walked into that corridor, trusting a structural assessment signed off through a chain of authorization that included a senator with a financial interest in the company that produced it. Coda had gone in ahead of them because she had been told to send him. And the ceiling had come down because a building had been declared safe by equipment connected through money, through interest, through the specific corruption that happens when power and profit share the same bed, to a man who had been at the planning table for the operation itself. They hadn't just made a bad call. They had designed a situation in which the bad outcome was built into the foundation. That's not negligence, Maya said. Her voice was very quiet. That's not even recklessness. No, Sharon said. It isn't. Keyes knew this. He knew about Boyle's financial stake. He didn't know, or says he didn't know, that Meridian's assessment was compromised. But he knew the conflict of interest existed, and he didn't report it because he had been told very clearly that certain things about certain people were not his concern. She looked at Maya. He said that on the record, those exact words, not my concern. And then he said, and I want you to hear this directly, he said that after Marcus Webb's father gave that interview, it became his concern. It became the only thing he was concerned with. Maya looked at the wall across from her and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained elements of both and was larger than either one. She felt the specific moral weight of a decision made by powerful men, in a room she had never been invited into a decision that had treated 3 lives as acceptable losses, and had then handed one surviving woman the blame for all of it, and called it a report. What happens to Boyle, she said. DOJ referral. Criminal conflict of interest, potentially manslaughter if the Meridian connection can be proven to have directly contributed to the structural failure. Sharon paused. Rourke's team has been working Meridian's records for 3 days. Maya, they're going to find what they're looking for. I'm confident of that. Maya nodded, filed it, breathed. And the families, she said. Thomas Webb, Darnell's mother. They'll be formally notified as part of the record correction process. The notification will include the Boyle connection. They'll know the full picture. They deserve to know it before it's in the news. I know. Rourke's coordinating on that. It'll happen today before the panel reconvenes. Maya looked at Rex. He had been watching her with that uninterrupted attention for the past 20 minutes, absolutely still reading her the way she read everything for the information that mattered beneath the surface of what was visible. We're almost there, she said to him, to herself. He pressed closer. The panel reconvened at 1400. Keyes's testimony concluded at 1619 as the light through the high windows shifted into the particular gold of late afternoon. The room was very quiet when he finished. Not the quiet of a room that has nothing to say, the quiet of a room that has too much and needs a moment to let it settle. Doss looked at Cahill. Does opposing counsel wish to cross-examine? Cahill conferred with his team for 40 seconds. Maya watched them. She watched the body language of 3 professionals encountering the specific problem of a witness who has nothing left to protect and has therefore removed every lever you would normally use to pry at his story. We'll reserve the right to submit written questions, Cahill said, which meant no, which meant they had nothing. Doss nodded. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 0900 for closing statements and panel deliberation. That night, Maya sat in her quarters and wrote 2 letters. Not for the record. Not for any proceeding. One to Thomas Webb and one to Darnell Pruitt's mother, whose name was Cecilia, and who had sat in the gallery for 2 days with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes steady and her grief worn on the outside in the particular way of a woman who has decided that if she has to carry it, she will carry it visibly with dignity where everyone can see it. She didn't mail the letters that night. She finished them and set them on her bunk and sat with Rex and the specific exhausted stillness of someone who has given everything they have to something that matters and is now waiting to find out if it was enough. She slept 4 hours. Real sleep. The kind that comes after something large has been released. The closing statements on day 3 took 2 hours. Maya's statement delivered by Merritt was 7 minutes long and contained nothing that was not already in the record, because Merritt understood, as she did, that the record was now so complete that anything added to it was decoration. The record stood on its own. Cahill's closing was 43 minutes, and Maya found herself somewhere around the 30-minute mark, feeling something she recognized with some surprise as sympathy for him. Not for Marsh, not for Boyle, not for any of the decisions that had led to this room, but for the specific position of a skilled attorney who has been handed an unwinnable case and is doing the best that professionalism allows with material that cannot be saved. He was very good. He was arguing on behalf of people who had done indefensible things, and he was doing it with craft and precision and the fundamental dignity of a man who believes the adversarial process serves justice, even when his side of it does not. She respected that. She still expected to win. The panel deliberated for 2 hours and 22 minutes. Maya spent them on the floor of the side room with her back against the wall because the chairs were designed for shorter waits than this, and she was done performing comfort she didn't feel. Rex sat with his weight against her leg. She put both hands on him and breathed and waited with the specific quality of stillness that she had built over 18 months of practicing it. Merritt came in at 13:47. He sat down on the floor beside her. She had not expected that from a man who wore suits that cost more than her monthly housing allowance, and something about the gesture, the willingness to just sit on the floor with her in the unglamorous reality of waiting, meant more than anything he could have said. He looked at her. The panel has reached a decision. She nodded. The panel has accepted Keyes' testimony in full. Operation Harrow is being formally reopened as a command investigation with criminal referral to the Department of Justice. He paused. Your service record will be corrected. The handler error citation is formally withdrawn. Another pause. It will be replaced with a commendation for conduct under hostile conditions. Maya stared at the wall across from her. Congressman Marsh is being referred to the House Ethics Committee and the DOJ simultaneously. Senator Boyle's referral is being processed separately given the financial conflict of interest component. Keyes is cooperating under a formal agreement. Merritt looked at her steadily. Pruitt's court-martial has been separately scheduled. He let all of that land. Then, you won Carter. She thought about Coda. Not the ending. She never let herself think about the ending. She thought about the work. The way he moved through a space with absolute confidence and absolute trust in the person on the other end of his lead. She thought about Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt and the families that had been handed wrong answers and told to grieve accordingly. The families, she said. The notification. Rourke's team is with Thomas Webb right now. Darnell's mother will be notified within the hour. The correction to the Harrow findings will include a formal statement that the operational failure resulted from command-level decisions and contractor negligence, not handler conduct. She absorbed that. It won't give them their people back. No, Merritt said, but it gives them the right name on the wrong thing. She paused. That matters. It matters more than most people who haven't needed it understand. Merritt nodded. He stood up, brushed off his suit, and extended a hand. She took it and stood, and Rex stood with her, and the three of them walked out into the corridor and toward whatever the rest of the day held. Diane Webb found her 20 feet from the proceedings room. She was smaller than Maya had imagined from Thomas's descriptions. Compact. Precise. The eyes of someone who had done an enormous amount of living in a short number of years. She was with a woman 2 steps behind her, a friend, clearly someone who understood when a moment needed space around it. Diane looked at Maya. Maya looked at Diane. Neither of them spoke first. Because there are some kinds of grief, and some kinds of truth for which language doesn't arrive immediately. Sometimes the first thing that needs to happen is just the looking. The acknowledgement of another person who was in the same fire from different directions and came out carrying the same knowledge. "My husband told me what you said to him on the phone," Diane said finally. Her jaw tightened and released. "About how Marcus moved. He said you described it. He said—" She stopped. "Nobody else described how he moved. They described what went wrong. You described him." Maya felt something she had kept very carefully closed for 18 months open just slightly, just enough. "He was good," she said. "He was really good at what he did. And he trusted the chain of command because he had earned the right to trust it. And the chain of command failed him." She paused. "That is the truth. I'm sorry it took this long to be the official truth." Diane reached out and put her hand briefly on Maya's arm. Just briefly. Just enough. "Thank you for coming back," she said. "For making them put the right name on it." She walked away with her friend, and Maya stood in the corridor and breathed, and Rex pressed against her leg, and she let herself feel the full weight of all of it. The grief, the relief, the long, bone-deep exhaustion of having been exactly right for 18 months about something that should never have been wrong in the first place. Her phone buzzed. "Rourke. Marsh's referral is moving to the House Ethics Committee and DOJ simultaneously," he said. "Boyle's people are already in contact with federal prosecutors. His attorney called 20 minutes after the panel's decision was announced." And Maya. A pause. "Meridian Systems. Their records confirm an undisclosed financial relationship. We have the documentation. It's going to hold." She stood with that. "The 4 women before me," she said. "Their records are part of the formal review. 3 of them have been notified. Their corrections will be processed as part of the same proceeding." He paused. "You opened a door that was locked for 6 years. That doesn't happen because of luck." "No," she said. "It doesn't." She hung up and walked to get Rex's lead and stood for a moment in the particular stillness of someone who has just watched something large and necessary reach its conclusion. Not its end, because the legal proceedings would run for months, and the institutional reform that needed to follow would take longer than that, but its conclusion. The point past which the truth could no longer be put back in the drawer. 6 days later, the formal offer arrived through merit. A position. Not a return to field operations. Something more specific than that, and when she read it, she understood that someone had thought carefully about exactly who she was and what she had spent 2 years demonstrating. Director of a newly established K-9 handler training program at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Full rank reinstatement. Development authority over the curriculum, the selection criteria, the standards. The mandate stated plainly in the offer letter was to build something that had not existed before in this specific form, a program that trained handlers not just in technical execution, but in the qualities the system had spent years trying to eliminate from Maya Carter, without ever understanding that those qualities were the entire point. Documentation. Integrity. The understanding that real operational effectiveness was not domination. It was precision patience and the absolute refusal to move until you were certain of the threat, certain of your training, certain of the person beside you. She read it twice, set it down, looked at Rex. "What do you think?" she said. Rex looked at her with the absolute, uncomplicated steadiness that had been for 2 years the most honest thing in her life. She picked up the pen. The pen touched the paper at 4:47 in the afternoon on a Friday, and the sound it made was nothing. No click, no ceremony. Just ink on a line the way all consequential things eventually reduce themselves to something smaller than their weight. Maya set the pen down, looked at the signature, looked at Rex. He was watching her with the expression she had come to understand as his version of well-then patient, unhurried, ready for whatever direction they were moving next. "Okay," she said. "We've got work to do." Merritt called at 08:30 the following Monday. He didn't bother with pleasantries because she had made clear early in their working relationship that she found them a waste of both their time. "Boyle's attorney contacted DOJ this morning," he said. "Proffer agreement. He's offering information in exchange for consideration on the financial conflict charges." Maya was already dressed on her second cup of coffee. What kind of information? The full structure of the off-book arrangement. Names, dates, the specific mechanism by which Bravo 7's operational access was being directed for non-national security purposes. A pause. He's also offering documentation on Meridian Systems, their internal communications about the structural assessment. Maya, there are emails. Time-stamped, archived from senior Meridian engineers flagging the Eastern Corridor's load capacity 3 days before the operation. She set down her coffee. "Someone at Meridian knew," she said. "Someone at Meridian documented their concerns through internal channels and was told in writing to finalize the assessment as cleared." Merritt's voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it, the particular intensity of a lawyer who has just watched a case expand in a direction that changes everything. Those emails were buried in a server archive that Meridian's legal team almost certainly believed would never be surfaced. But Boyle's attorney surfaced them. When your own client is facing federal indictment, you look for everything that shifts the weight onto someone else. Boyle's attorney is very good at his job. A beat. The emails don't exonerate Boyle. His financial stake in Meridian is still the root of the conflict. But they establish that the failure in the Eastern Corridor was not an equipment malfunction. It was a suppressed finding. Maya was very still. Marcus Webb and Darnell Pruitt walked into a corridor that someone knew was unsafe, she said. Her voice was flat, steady. The specific flatness of a person applying enormous pressure to keep something from breaking through in the wrong direction. "Yes," Merritt said. "And my report cited handler error." "Yes," she breathed. 4 in, hold, 4 out. "How long until the indictment?" DOJ is targeting 60 days. Marsh's Ethics Committee referral runs parallel. His attorneys filed 2 more delay motions yesterday, both denied. And Pruitt's court-martial has been formally scheduled, February 14th. She almost said something about the date. She didn't. "The 4 women," she said instead. "Their record corrections. Processing now. 3 of the 4 have received formal notification. Their service files are being amended as part of the same Harrow proceeding." He paused. "The 4th has not responded to contact." Maya had been waiting for that. She had been turning it over since Rourke first mentioned it, the 4th woman, the one who had declined to participate. She had understood that choice completely and respected it completely, and had not for 1 second stopped thinking about what that woman was carrying alone. "Do you have her name?" Maya asked. "Her file is sealed under the correction proceedings. I don't have authorization to—" "I'm not asking for her file," Maya said. "I'm asking if she has a way to reach me if she decides she wants to." A pause. "I can make sure that channel exists." "Do that." She called at 11:42 on a Wednesday night 3 weeks later. Unknown number which Maya recognized by now as a signal in itself. She picked up on the second ring. "Carter." Silence for 3 seconds. Then, "My name is Emma Calloway. I was the second transfer out of Bravo 7, 2 years before you." Maya sat up. Rex lifted his head. "I know who you are," Maya said. "I'm glad you called." Another silence. Not hostile, the silence of someone who has been deciding whether to make this call for a long time and is still deciding right up until the moment the words actually come. "I heard about the hearing. I've been following everything." Emma's voice was low, controlled, with an edge of something underneath it that Maya recognized because she had heard it in her own voice for 18 months. The specific tension of a person who has been holding something too long and whose grip is starting to change. "I need to ask you something," Emma said. "Go ahead." Did you know when you came back to that unit? Did you know you were going to be able to do what you did? Or did you just decide you were going to and figure out the rest as you went? Maya thought about it honestly. Both, she said. I knew what I was building toward. I didn't know exactly what it would cost or exactly what shape it would take. But I knew the record was wrong, and I knew I was the person who could fix it, and those two things were enough to keep moving. Emma was quiet. I found something, she said, when I was at Bravo 7. Something I didn't know what to do with and didn't know who to trust, so I did what you did. I kept it. A breath. I've been keeping it for 3 years. Maya's pulse moved. What did you find? Meridian systems, Emma said. I was assigned to review logistics documentation for Bravo 7's second off-book operation. I wasn't supposed to see the contractor assessment reports, but they were in the same physical folder as my assigned materials. I saw the internal routing stamp. There was a secondary review request, flagged and then canceled, on the Meridian assessment. She paused. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I know what it means now. You have documentation of the canceled secondary review, Maya said slowly. I photographed the routing stamp before I reported the misfile to my supervisor. My supervisor removed the materials, and 2 days later I received my transfer orders. Her voice was completely steady, but Maya could feel the weight behind the steadiness, the specific weight of 3 years of carrying something that nobody believed was real, until it suddenly, irrefutably was. I didn't come forward because I didn't think anyone would believe one photograph from a handler who had been officially transferred for integration issues. And because I was 26 years old, and I had worked for 9 years to get where I was, and I knew what coming forward would cost. I know, Maya said. You were 29, Emma said, and you came back anyway. I had Rex, Maya said. It wasn't the whole answer, but it was the truest one. And I had a record that was wrong. Those two things. Emma exhaled. Long, slow, the specific breath of someone making a decision they've been circling for a long time and have finally landed on. I want to give my photograph to Rourke. I want it in the record, with my name on it. She paused. Can you tell me how to do that? I can do better than that, Maya said. I can have Merritt call you in the morning and walk you through every step. You won't do any of it alone. Okay. A pause. Carter? Yeah. Thank you for not letting them make it about integration. The word came out with a precise, specific contempt that Maya felt in her chest. That was the word they always used, like we were the problem that needed to be managed instead of the system. You weren't the problem, Maya said. None of us were. And now the record says so. Emma said goodnight and hung up, and Maya sat in the quiet with Rex and felt something that she had learned over the course of this process to identify accurately without inflating it or deflating it. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was the specific grounded feeling of a thing being made whole that had been broken for a long time, piece by piece, one documented truth at a time. She called Merritt at 700 the next morning and gave him Emma Calloway's number. The photograph of the canceled secondary review routing stamp entered the formal record 11 days later. Meridian Systems' legal team, already managing the suppressed engineer emails, responded with a statement characterizing it as a clerical cancellation with no operational significance. DOJ characterized it differently. The indictment, when it came, named 4 Meridian executives alongside Senator Richard Boyle. The charge sheet ran to 19 pages. Congressman Gerald Marsh resigned from his seat on a Thursday morning with a statement that cited health reasons and the desire to spend time with his family. The statement was issued at 7:02 a.m., which told everyone who read it everything they needed to know about how voluntary the decision had been. His approval rating had not recovered from the 11-point drop. His own party had stopped returning his calls 3 weeks before the resignation. Sharon sent Maya the news link at 7:08 a.m. with no message attached, just the link. Maya read the headline, closed her phone, and took Rex out for his morning run. She thought about Marsh during the run, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the specific clarity of a person looking at a consequence and recognizing it as proportionate. He had sat at a table and approved a mission that killed people, and then watched the blame get assigned to a handler and signed off on that too. What happened to him now was not vengeance. It was gravity. Pruitt's court-martial began on a Tuesday in February and concluded in 8 days with a conviction on 3 counts: criminal threatening conduct, unbecoming, and obstruction of a military investigation. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for April. Weston had cooperated with investigators in October, exactly as Maya had predicted the moment she watched him step back in that corridor, and his cooperation had earned him an administrative separation instead of criminal charges. Brandt had followed 2 weeks later because men like Brandt always follow the first person who shows them the door. Commander Ellis Hatch submitted his retirement paperwork in January, 18 months ahead of his eligible date. He did not request a ceremony. The corrected service record arrived in Maya's email at 6:23 in the morning, on a day when she had 3 briefings scheduled and a curriculum review meeting at noon. The subject line was administrative formal, unremarkable. She opened it and read the amended language 3 times. Where it had said, "handler error," it now said, "conduct commended under hostile operational conditions." Where it had attributed the Harrow outcome to her decision-making, it now attributed it to command-level failures and contractor negligence. She read it 3 times, and then she closed her laptop and sat with her hands flat on the desk and breathed and did not try to manage what she felt, because what she felt was large and complicated and not something that benefited from management in private. Rex put his chin on her knee. She put her hand on his head and sat with it. "We did it," she said, not triumphantly, just as a fact, the way you state coordinates, the way you report a thing that is now simply true. He leaned into her hand. The training program's first cohort reported on a Monday in March. 12 handlers, men and women, various backgrounds, various entry points into military service, all of them at the beginning of something they did not yet fully understand. Maya had spent 4 months building the curriculum from the ground up, and the experience of building it had taught her things about what she knew that she had not known she knew, until she was required to articulate it clearly enough that someone else could learn from it. The selection criteria she had written were different from any K-9 handler selection process currently in use. They weighted patience more heavily than aggression. They weighted documentation discipline as a primary competency. They weighted the ability to function under sustained institutional pressure, not just physical pressure, not just operational stress, but the specific pressure of being right in an environment that does not want you to be right, and will apply significant force to make you doubt yourself. Sharon had read the draft criteria and called her and said, "This reads like a description of you." "It reads like a description of what the program was missing," Maya said. "I'm just the first person who needed it badly enough to write it down." She stood in front of the 12 of them on that Monday morning with Rex at her left heel, and looked at them the way she always looked at anything she was trying to understand fully directly, without the protective distance of performance. They were young, not in years. Necessarily, some of them were in their 30s. One was 42, but young in the specific way of people who have not yet been inside the fire. They had training. They had skills. They had the focused intensity of individuals who had worked hard to be in this room. What they did not yet have was the particular knowledge that only comes from being tested by something that is trying to break you and holding. She was here to give them the foundation that might someday make the holding possible. Rex was in a building when it fell, she said. No welcome, no preamble. Just the fact placed in front of them like the first stone of something. He came out. Not because he was the largest animal in that building. Not because he was the most aggressive. Not because of luck. She paused. Because he trusted his training completely, trusted his handler completely, and never once confused fear with weakness or silence with surrender. The 12 of them were very still. That is the standard we're building toward in this program, she said. Not speed, not aggression, not the performance of toughness. She let that land for exactly one beat. Those things are available everywhere. What is not available everywhere, What this program exists to build is the kind of handler who does not break when the institution they're serving decides for whatever reason that the easiest solution is to make it their fault. A woman in the front row, young, precise posture. The look of someone working hard not to appear nervous and almost succeeding, raised her hand. "Yes," Maya said. "The K9 you mentioned. The one in the building." She paused. "What happened to the handler?" "The one who was with him." Maya looked at her, held her gaze for exactly 1 beat. "She's standing in front of you," she said. The silence that followed had a texture. She could feel it, 12 people recalibrating simultaneously, adjusting the distance between the abstract and the specific, between a lesson and the person who paid for it in years, and documented incidents, and 2:17 in the morning with a gun barrel at the base of her skull. Rex pressed his shoulder against the back of her knee. Steady, present. "You're going to hear a lot in this program about what a handler is supposed to be," Maya said. Her voice was even. "You're going to encounter definitions from people who have never been tested, and definitions from people who have been tested and broke, and definitions from people who have been tested and held. The definitions from the last group are the only ones worth keeping." She let that settle. "What I am going to teach you is not a definition. It is a practice, a daily, disciplined, documented practice of being exactly what you are, even when, especially when the environment around you insists that what you are is the problem." A man in the third row, older than most of the cohort, said quietly, "How do you know when you're right and when you're just being stubborn?" Maya looked at him. "Good question." She meant it. "The difference is documentation. Stubbornness is a feeling. Rightness is a record. You build the record every day, every incident, every detail that seems small until it doesn't. And when the moment comes, and for some of you it will come, maybe not like it came for me, but it will come, you will have something solid under your feet, not just your conviction, evidence." The man nodded. She saw something change in his expression. Not agreement exactly, something more like recognition. The look of a person who has felt that distinction in their own life without having words for it until someone else provided them. The morning ran for 3 hours. By the time she dismissed the cohort for their first practical evaluation, something had shifted in how they moved, barely perceptible a degree of attention that had not been there when they walked in. She recognized it because she had felt it herself once a long time ago, the first time someone in her training had said something true enough that her body adjusted to accommodate it. She walked out afterward with Rex and called Thomas Webb, because she had promised herself she would call him on the first day of the program. He picked up on the third ring, and she could hear from the background noise that he was at work. And she could hear from the way he said her name that he had been expecting this call. "We started today," she said. "How many Mia?" he asked. 12 in the first cohort. "And Rex." She looked down at Rex, who was watching the middle distance with that absolute attention he brought to everything. "Right here?" she said. Thomas Webb was quiet for a moment. "Marcus would have—" He stopped. Tried again. He would have wanted to be in that program. That's the kind of training he always said was missing. The stuff underneath the technical. The why of it. "I know," Maya said. "I think that's why I built it the way I did." "Will you tell them about him? The people in the program?" She thought about that. About the specific responsibility of carrying someone else's story into a room where it can do something. "When it's relevant," she said. "Yes, I will." He thanked her, and she let herself receive it without deflecting, because she had spent a long time deflecting things that deserved to be received, and she was done doing that. She said goodbye, and stood in the quiet for a moment with Rex and the particular feeling of a beginning that has earned itself. 3 months later, at the first cohort's midpoint evaluation, a woman named Sergeant Clara Osai submitted the most thorough incident documentation Maya had seen from a junior handler in 8 years of field experience. It covered a training scenario in which a superior officer's verbal directive contradicted established safety protocols. Osei had followed the protocol, filed an immediate written record of the conflicting directive, and requested written clarification before proceeding. The superior officer had been frustrated. The training scenario had been delayed by 40 minutes. The documentation was flawless. Maya read it twice, set it down, and wrote in the margin in her own handwriting, "This is exactly the standard. Well done." She thought when she wrote it about the first report she had ever filed at Bravo 7, the one that had disappeared between her desk and Hatch's office. She thought about what it had taken to keep filing after that, not stubbornness, because she knew now had known then the difference, but the discipline of a person who has decided that the record matters even when nobody is looking, even when nobody responds, even when the evidence of its mattering won't arrive for months or years, or not at all. Clara Osei had done that instinctively. On a training exercise, on day 1. Maya thought this is what the program is for. She held the first cohort's graduation ceremony on a Thursday in June. 12 handlers, 12 K-9 partners, and in the audience at Maya's personal invitation, communicated through Merritt, who had raised one eyebrow at the request and then made it happen without further comment. Thomas and his wife and Darnell Pruitt's mother, Cecilia and Emma Calloway, who had driven 4 hours and walked in quietly and sat in the back row and watched the whole thing with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough in the aftermath of something to finally see something built from it. At the end of the ceremony, Maya stood at the front and looked at 12 people who now carried something they had not carried when they walked in 3 months ago. Not just skills, not just protocols, the specific grounded understanding of what it means to do the work with integrity when the environment is designed to make integrity costly. Rex sat at her left heel, steady, unperformed, exactly where he always was. She had one thing left to say. "You came in here 3 months ago as individuals," she said. "You leave here as something harder to dismantle than individuals. You leave here as handlers who know why documentation matters before you need it, who know why the record matters before it's the only thing between you and a false story." She paused. "The people who built the system that I spent 2 years fighting did not believe that the truth would survive them. They were wrong. The truth survived because someone kept the record when nobody was watching. Because someone refused to let the wrong name stay on the wrong thing." She let that settle across all 12 faces. That is your job now, not just in the field, not just in high-stakes operational moments, every day. In the ordinary, undramatic discipline of building a record that tells the truth about what actually happened. She looked at them for one last moment. "Dismissed," she said. Rex pressed against her leg as the room filled with the sound of 12 people standing talking, moving toward the people they had come to trust. She watched them and felt the specific weight of what had been built, not finished, never finished, but built out of everything that had been taken and everything that had been refused, and everything that had been documented and held and carried forward through 18 months of a system trying to make her disappear. They had tried to take her record. They had tried to take her partner. They had tried to take her voice and her credibility and the space she occupied in a unit that had no intention of being changed by her presence. She had not let them. And now she was standing in front of 12 people who would go out and build their own records and train their own partners and refuse their own erasures. And some of them would face something like what she had faced, and they would have something she hadn't had: a blueprint, a standard, a program that said in its very existence that the qualities the system tried to eliminate were the qualities worth protecting most. She clipped Rex's lead and walked out into the morning with her head up and her pace even, and the absolute unqualified certainty of a woman who had been told she didn't belong, had built the proof that she did, and had turned that proof into something that would outlast every person who had ever tried to erase her. Maya Carter had not survived in spite of what she was. She had survived because of it, and she was done completely, permanently, irreversibly done, letting anyone tell her otherwise.